The morning sun slipped through the windows of the small public school, painting soft lines across the floor of the music room. The old piano stood in the corner, its black paint chipped and one of the keys slightly loose. Students gathered around it, chatting and laughing as the teacher, known for her strictness, entered with a clipboard in her hand. She clapped twice, and the room went quiet. "Today," she said with a smile that wasn't really a smile, "we're going to do something special. Each of you will try a section of this new piece." She held up a sheet of music filled with fast notes and sharp cymbals. It looked complicated even to the confident students. The class groaned softly, but one boy in the back said nothing. He sat with his small notebook, his hands folded neatly. He was the kind of student everyone noticed but never really knew. His clothes were always clean but worn, his shoes scuffed, and he rarely spoke unless spoken to. He didn't have fancy supplies like others did, and during lunch he often ate alone near the window. The teacher began calling students one by one to the piano. Most of them struggled through the first few lines, missing keys or stopping to laugh nervously. The teacher nodded patiently, correcting their posture and hand position. Then her eyes fell on the quiet boy in the back. "You," she said, pointing her pencil toward him. "It's your turn." The boy froze. "Me, ma'am?" he asked quietly, almost in disbelief. "Yes, you." "Everyone must try," she said firmly. He stood slowly and walked toward the piano, feeling the eyes of his classmates follow him. A few whispered and smiled behind their hands. One of them muttered, "He doesn't even have a piano at home." Another giggled. The teacher caught the whisper but said nothing. She was slightly annoyed that the boy hadn't volunteered earlier. In her mind, she thought he probably didn't care much about the class anyway. The boy reached the piano and stood there for a moment, looking down at the keys like they were strangers. "I've never played this one before," he said softly. The teacher crossed her arms. "Then try. That's how you learn." He looked up nervously. I don't know how to read this music," he admitted. A few students laughed out loud. The teacher frowned. "You mean to tell me you've been in my class for months and still can't read basic notation?" His face turned red. "I try to learn from the book, but we don't have one at home." That's enough," she interrupted sharply. "You'll never learn if you keep making excuses. Sit down and try the first part. We're all waiting." He sat on the old piano bench and placed his fingers gently on the keys. They were colder than he expected. His heart thumped so loudly he could almost hear it over the chatter of the class. For a few seconds he just sat there. His mind was blank. The teacher tapped her foot impatiently. "Go on," she said. He pressed a few random keys, hesitated, and then stopped. The sound came out uneven and uncertain. The class burst into quiet laughter again. Someone whispered, "He's useless," and another added, "Why is he even in music class?" The teacher sighed, shaking her head. "This is what happens when you don't practice. You can't expect to learn anything without effort. Sit up straight. Try again." He swallowed hard and placed his fingers again, trying to remember what he had seen in the book at the library the other day, but his hands felt heavy and his stomach twisted with shame. He knew he wasn't stupid. He loved music more than anything, but right now everyone was staring at him like he didn't belong. The teacher moved closer, her voice lower this time. "Music is about discipline," she said, "not about feelings. If you want to be taken seriously, you have to work hard. Do you understand?" He nodded, though his eyes were on the floor. "Good. Play again." This time he pressed a few more keys, slower, more careful. The sound still wasn't right, but at least it resembled a melody. A few classmates leaned forward, surprised that it didn't sound terrible. Still, the teacher shook her head. "That's enough," she said, waving her hand. "Go back to your seat. Maybe next time you'll come prepared." He stood up, feeling his throat tighten. He wanted to say that he practiced every night. Not on a real piano, but on a wooden table at home. He wanted to explain how he drew keys on paper because his family couldn't afford one, but the words didn't come out. He just nodded quietly and walked back to his seat. As he sat down, he heard one student whisper, "He probably doesn't even know what a piano costs." Another laughed. The sound burned in his ears. He kept his eyes on his notebook, pretending to write something while he blinked fast to keep his tears from falling. The teacher continued calling other students. The room filled again with uneven notes, mistakes, and giggles. But in the boy's mind, the sound of that piano wouldn't leave him. It was the first time he had touched a real one in months. even though he had embarrassed himself. For a brief second, when his fingers touched those keys, something had come alive inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. After class, when everyone left, he stayed behind, pretending to pack slowly. The teacher was busy writing on the board. He glanced at the piano again. It seemed so close and yet unreachable, like something that didn't belong to him. The teacher turned around and saw him standing there. "What are you still doing here?" she asked. "I was just looking," he said softly. She sighed. "You can look all you want, but looking won't teach you how to play. Practice, and maybe one day you'll do better." "Yes, ma'am," he whispered and walked out. That evening, after walking the long road home, he passed a small cafe where an old upright piano sat near the window. The cafe owner sometimes played slow songs that drifted out into the street. The boy stopped outside, his school bag still on his shoulder, and stood listening. He watched the man's hands move across the keys with ease. For a moment, the boy closed his eyes and imagined it was him sitting there. When he reached home, his mother was cooking in the small kitchen. "You're late," she said, smiling tiredly. "How was school?" He smiled faintly. It was fine. He didn't tell her about the class or the laughter or how the teacher had made him feel small. He didn't want to worry her. Their home was small but warm, and his mother worked hard every day just to keep things running. After dinner, he sat at the old wooden table. On the surface were faint pencil marks, little rectangles he had drawn months ago to look like piano keys. He placed his fingers on them just like he had earlier at school. Slowly he began to play, pressing the fake keys and whispering the notes under his breath. He didn't have the sound, but he had the rhythm. He remembered how each key felt, how it sounded for that brief moment in class. The more he imagined it, the clearer it became in his mind. He stayed up late, practicing silently in the dim light, until his mother came in and told him to rest. When he finally lay down to sleep, the words of his teacher echoed in his head. "Music is about discipline, not feelings." He disagreed quietly to himself. He thought music was only about feelings. Discipline could be learned, but passion could not. And even though the world had laughed at him today, he promised himself that one day he would sit at a piano again, not because someone forced him to, but because it was where he belonged. The next morning, as he walked back to school, he saw a group of students from his class ahead of him, laughing and talking. He stayed behind them, keeping his distance. He didn't want to be noticed. But in his mind, he kept hearing the piece the teacher had shown them, the one full of difficult notes and quick movements. He hummed it quietly to himself, memorizing every part he could recall. He didn't know it yet, but that piece, the one meant to embarrass him, would one day become the reason everyone would remember his name. For now, though, he was just a quiet boy walking to school with a small dream and a big heart, holding on to a promise only he could hear. The next day at school started like any other. The boy walked quietly through the narrow gate, his backpack hanging loosely from one shoulder. His shoes scraped against the dusty ground as he crossed the yard. Inside, the usual laughter and chatter filled the air, but it all sounded distant to him. He kept thinking about the piano keys, the cold feel beneath his fingers, and the music sheet with notes he couldn't yet read. When he entered the music room, the same old piano stood there, its wooden surface shining faintly under the morning light. He couldn't help but glance at it. It felt almost like the piano was waiting for him, reminding him of the moment that had embarrassed him in front of everyone. He quickly looked away and sat in the back again. The teacher arrived a few minutes later, carrying more sheets of music. She greeted the class with her usual firm tone, though there was a spark of energy in her voice that day. "We'll continue with yesterday's piece," she said. "I expect improvement." Groans filled the room. No one liked that song. It was far too difficult even for the more confident students. But the teacher insisted it would help them learn discipline and patience. She started calling on students one by one again. The boy kept his head down, hoping she wouldn't notice him this time. He quietly traced lines in his notebook, pretending to write. But his ears stayed open. Every time someone played, he listened carefully. He could tell who missed a note, who played too fast, who pressed the wrong key. His ear was sharp, sharper than anyone realized. When the last student finished, the teacher paused. Her eyes scanned the room. "We'll have one more," she said, and her gaze landed on him again. A ripple of laughter spread through the class. The boy's chest tightened. Not again, he thought. "You'll try it once more." the teacher said, motioning him forward. He hesitated. Ma'am, maybe someone else— No, she interrupted. Yesterday you said you couldn't do it. Today you'll show us that you at least tried. The boy stood slowly, his legs heavy. He could feel the eyes of his classmates following him as he walked to the piano. A few whispered, and someone snickered when his chair scraped loudly against the floor. He sat down and stared at the keys. The teacher placed the same sheet of music in front of him. Play the first section, she said. He nodded, his throat dry. His fingers hovered over the keys and he closed his eyes for a moment. The laughter and whispers faded into a soft blur around him. He remembered how he had sat at his wooden table the night before, pressing imaginary keys. He remembered how the notes had sounded in his mind. When he opened his eyes, his hands began to move, slowly at first, then faster. The sound that came out surprised everyone. The first few notes were careful, uncertain, but then something changed. His hands seemed to find their place. His fingers began to flow naturally, pressing each key with precision and grace. The classroom fell silent. Even the teacher froze, her arms still crossed. No one had expected this. He played through the first few lines, his rhythm steady and confident. The melody came alive, gentle yet strong, filled with emotion. The boy's shoulders relaxed, and for the first time he forgot he was being watched. He wasn't playing for them. He was playing for himself. The teacher took a small step closer, watching his fingers glide across the piano. His touch was delicate, yet every note carried power and clarity. It was as if he had been born to play. The piece grew more difficult as it went on, with faster movements and tricky jumps. But he didn't stop. His fingers danced from one side of the keyboard to the other, hitting every note like he had done it 100 times before. When he finally reached the last note, the sound lingered in the air and soft and beautiful, fading slowly into silence. No one moved. The teacher's mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide. The students sat frozen, unsure of what they had just seen. The same boy they had laughed at the day before had just played the piece better than anyone else in the class, maybe even better than the teacher herself. The silence broke when someone whispered, "How did he do that?" The teacher finally spoke, her voice quieter than usual. "Where did you learn that?" The boy blinked, still catching his breath. I practiced last night," he said softly. "Practiced? You said you don't have a piano," she said, disbelief in her voice. He nodded shyly. "I don't, but I practiced on my table at home. I drew the keys." A murmur spread across the room. One student said under his breath, "He's joking," but the boy continued, his voice steady now. "My father taught me when I was little. He used to play before he got sick. We couldn't afford a piano, so he drew one on the table with chalk. He showed me how to move my fingers even without sound. I remember every note by heart." The teacher didn't know what to say. She looked at him, seeing him differently for the first time. There was no sign of pride in his eyes, no arrogance, and only sincerity and quiet strength. After a long moment, she said softly, "Play it again." The boy nodded. This time the class leaned forward, eager to hear. He began again, and as the first few notes filled the room, a hush fell over everyone. It wasn't just skill, there was feeling in every sound. The melody wasn't mechanical. It was alive. Each note carried a piece of his heart, of his story, his father's lessons, his long nights practicing in silence, his quiet dreams. The room, usually filled with noise and laughter, became still. Even the students who had teased him yesterday now sat completely silent, eyes fixed on his hands. When he reached the end once more, the sound faded into a deep stillness that seemed to hang in the air. Then for a moment that felt unreal, everyone began to clap. It wasn't loud at first, just a few hesitant claps, then more joined in. Soon the entire room was applauding. The boy looked up, startled. He had never heard applause meant for him before. The teacher smiled faintly, though her eyes were thoughtful. She walked closer to him and rested a hand on his shoulder. "That was incredible," she said quietly. "You have a gift." The boy looked down, embarrassed. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me," she said. "You should be proud of yourself." For the rest of the class, no one laughed or whispered anymore. The boy returned to his seat, and for the first time, it didn't feel like the back of the room was a hiding place. He sat tall, still processing what had just happened. When the bell rang, a few students came up to him. One of them said awkwardly, "And that was really good." Another added, I didn't know you could play like that." He smiled politely but didn't say much. Inside, though, something had changed. The embarrassment from the day before was gone. In its place was a quiet confidence. He had shown them who he really was, not through words, but through music. Later that day, as he left school, the teacher stopped him near the gate. "Wait," she called. He turned around, surprised. She walked up to him, holding a small folder. "You should keep this," she said, handing him a few old sheets of music. "It's the piece you played, and a few others I think you'll like." He accepted them carefully, almost afraid to touch them. "Thank you," he said. She smiled. "You have real talent. You just need the right chance," he nodded shyly. "I'll keep practicing." As he walked home, the folded papers tucked safely under his arm, the world seemed a little brighter. The air smelled like dust and sunlight, and he could hear children laughing somewhere far off. But in his mind, he still heard the piano, the song he had played, the rhythm of it, the memory of the keys under his hands. When he reached home, he spread the sheets on the table and began tracing the notes with his finger. His mother watched from the doorway, curious. "What's that?" she asked. "Music," he said, smiling softly. "Real music." That night after dinner, he sat again at his wooden piano, pressing the chalk-drawn keys, repeating each movement slowly, perfectly. Every sound existed only in his imagination, but to him it was enough. He was no longer the boy who couldn't play, he was the boy who could. And though he didn't know it yet, that one moment in the classroom, when his teacher forced him to play, would be the start of something much bigger than he ever dreamed. The next few days at school felt different. The boy noticed small things that had quietly changed. When he walked into the classroom, people no longer laughed at him. Some nodded politely, others smiled a little. The whispers that used to sting his ears were gone. Even the teacher seemed softer now. During breaks, a few students asked him questions about the piano. "How did you learn so fast?" one asked. Another said, "Can you teach me that part you played?" He didn't know what to say. He had never been someone others came to for help. He had always been the quiet one in the back, the one no one really noticed. But now people were actually looking at him with curiosity, not pity. It felt strange, but also warm. The teacher started to take a special interest in him, too. She began giving him extra time on the piano after class. When the final bell rang and the room emptied, she would stay behind, watching as he practiced the same piece over and over. "You have a good ear," she told him one afternoon as he played. "You listen before you touch the keys. That's what great pianists do." He smiled shyly. "My father always said music isn't just sound. It's feeling." The teacher paused, hearing those words. There was truth in them. Something she herself had forgotten over the years of teaching. She had always focused on technique, on perfection, but here was this poor boy reminding her what music really meant. She asked about his father, and the boy told her simple things, how he used to hum songs while fixing old radios, how they couldn't afford a piano but made one out of chalk drawings, how his father used to tap rhythms on the table for him to follow. The teacher listened quietly. Something about his story touched her deeply. When he finished playing, she said softly, "You're not just good. You have something special." He looked down, unsure how to respond. Praise still made him uncomfortable. The next week, the teacher made an announcement to the class. "Our school will take part in the city's annual youth music showcase next month," she said. "It's a big event. Musicians from different schools will perform. I'll be selecting one student to represent us." Excitement spread across the room. Everyone began whispering and glancing at each other. Some students who had been learning piano for years sat up straighter, confident they'd be chosen. The boy stayed quiet. He didn't even dream of being picked. He had only been allowed to use the piano for a few days. But later, when class ended, the teacher called him aside. "Would you like to try for the showcase?" she asked. He stared at her, surprised. "Me, but I'm not ready. I only know that one piece." "You'll learn," she said gently. "You have the heart for it. That matters more than anything." He wanted to say no, but her words stayed with him all day. That evening, while sitting at his small wooden table, he imagined what it would be like to play in front of a real audience. The idea scared him, but it also filled him with excitement he couldn't explain. The next morning, he went to see the teacher before class. "I want to try," he said simply. From that day on, everything changed. The teacher began giving him new pieces, more challenging ones. At first, the notes looked impossible. His fingers stumbled, his rhythm broke, but he refused to give up. After school, while others went home, he stayed in the empty music room, practicing until the janitor came to lock up. The teacher sometimes stayed too, listening quietly or helping him with the hard parts. She saw how quickly he learned, how he could remember whole sections after hearing them once. It amazed her. But what amazed her even more was his patience. He never got angry when he made mistakes. He just smiled softly, started again, and kept going. At home, he continued practicing on his chalk-drawn piano. His mother watched him from the kitchen, sometimes shaking her head with both worry and pride. "You'll wear out that table," she would tease. He laughed. "It's already worn out," he said. Sometimes when she went to bed, he stayed up late, moving his fingers over the silent keys, hearing the music in his mind. He imagined the sound filling a hall, people listening quietly, the lights warm on his face. He didn't know why, but every time he imagined it, his heart beat faster. Weeks passed, and the showcase day drew near. The teacher helped him pick the final piece, the same one she had first forced him to play, but now with new sections and variations. "You started with this," she said. "Let it be the one that shows how far you've come." He nodded. The piece had once been his shame, but now it was his strength. The day of the event came with bright skies and a nervous energy in the air. The boy wore the only clean shirt he had, carefully ironed by his mother the night before. It was slightly too big, but he didn't care. When they arrived at the city auditorium, he froze for a moment. The building was huge, with glass doors and long hallways filled with people, students carrying instruments, parents, teachers, and judges in formal clothes. He had never seen anything like it. The teacher placed a hand on his shoulder. "You'll be fine," she said. Inside the main hall, the sound of music echoed, violins, flutes, singers warming up. When he saw the grand piano on stage, his breath caught. It was far larger and shinier than the one at school. The keys gleamed under the lights like something out of a dream. As other students performed, he watched from backstage. Some played beautifully, others stumbled nervously, but all received polite applause. Finally, his name was called. He stepped onto the stage, his hands cold, his heart pounding. The bright lights made it hard to see the audience, but he could sense hundreds of eyes watching. He sat down, placed his fingers on the keys, and took a deep breath. For a few seconds, he didn't move. The world seemed to slow down. Then he remembered his father's words. Music isn't just sound. It's feeling. He began to play. The first notes floated softly through the hall. They were smooth and delicate, but strong enough to fill every corner of the room. As the melody grew, his confidence did too. His fingers moved faster, lighter, freer, like they were flying. Every note told a story. Of the boy who practiced in silence, of the teacher who doubted him, of the laughter he turned into determination. The audience sat still, listening. Even the judges leaned forward, drawn by the emotion in the music. The teacher, standing backstage, felt tears in her eyes. The same boy she once embarrassed in front of the class was now commanding an entire hall. When he reached the final section, he slowed down, letting each note fall like drops of water. Then came the last chord, deep, powerful, and full of heart. He lifted his hands from the keys. Silence. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then the applause began, slow at first, then louder until the entire hall was clapping. The boy stood and bowed awkwardly, his cheeks flushed. The lights reflected off the piano, and for a brief moment he felt like he belonged there. Not as the poor student, not as the quiet boy, but as a pianist. Backstage, the teacher hugged him gently. "You were brilliant," she whispered. He smiled shyly. "I just played what I felt." "That's exactly why it worked," she said. When the results were announced later, he didn't expect to win. But when they called his name for first place, he froze, unable to believe it. The teacher nudged him forward, and he walked onto the stage again, accepting the small golden trophy with shaking hands. The applause returned, and he saw faces in the crowd, smiling, cheering. Some were even crying. He looked out, searching for his mother, and when he saw her standing near the back, clapping with tears in her eyes, he couldn't help but smile wider. That night when they went home, he placed the trophy on the table beside his chalk-drawn piano. It caught the dim light from the bulb and shone softly. His mother touched it and said, "Your father would be proud." The boy looked at the marks on the table, where his fingers had practiced countless times, and whispered, "I hope he heard it." In that quiet room, filled with love and dreams, he knew this was only the beginning. After winning the city showcase, the boy returned to school carrying a quiet pride in his chest. People treated him differently now. The students who had once ignored or teased him nodded politely in the hallways. Some even smiled and asked questions about the music. It was strange, but it also felt good. He had never known that people could look at him with respect. The teacher, who had once doubted him, started spending more time helping him. She gave him challenging pieces, showing him techniques he had never seen before. But unlike before, there was no pressure, no impatience in her voice. She encouraged him gently, guiding him through every difficult section. One afternoon, after everyone else had left, she stayed behind and handed him a sheet of music. "This is harder than the last piece," she said softly. "It will push you, but I know you can do it." The boy looked at the sheet. The notes sprawled across the page like a forest he had to walk through. He felt a flicker of doubt. It looked impossible. But then he remembered the applause, the look in his mother's eyes, and the feeling of the piano under his fingers. He nodded. "I'll try." That evening, he went home and spread the sheet across his wooden table. He carefully traced the notes with his fingers, imagining each sound. Slowly, patiently, he began to practice. His mother peeked in from the doorway. "Another sheet?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he said, smiling faintly. "It's harder, but I want to learn it." She shook her head with both worry and pride. "You'll wear yourself out," she said softly. "I won't," he promised, though he knew he would stay up late again. He practiced until his hands ached, but every ache felt like a step forward, a proof that he was growing. Back at school, word of his performance at the showcase spread. Students from other classes stopped him in the hallway, asking for lessons or advice. Some wanted to hear him play again. The boy didn't refuse, but he always insisted on practicing quietly first. Music was something personal to him, and he treated it like a treasure. One day, the teacher approached him with an idea. "There's a regional competition coming up," she said. "I think you should participate. You have the skill and the heart for it." The boy hesitated. The thought of playing in front of even more people made his stomach twist. "I don't know," he said softly. "It's a bigger hall, more people. I'm not sure I can do it." "You can," she said firmly. "You've already shown that. You just need to believe it too." Her words stayed with him. That night he imagined himself standing on a large stage, lights shining down, hundreds of eyes watching. At first it made him anxious, but then he imagined the sound of the piano, the feeling of the music flowing from his fingers. Slowly the fear turned into excitement. For the next few weeks he practiced every day after school. Sometimes the teacher stayed late with him, helping him master difficult parts. Sometimes he practiced alone, tracing each note, imagining every sound, perfecting each rhythm. He began to notice small improvements in his technique. His fingers moved faster, his rhythm steadier, his confidence growing with every note. At home, he stayed up later than ever. The wooden table in his small room became a place of imagination and learning. Even though there was no sound, he could hear the music in his mind, every chord and every melody coming alive. His mother watched quietly from the doorway, making sure he didn't push himself too far but never interrupting. She understood that this was something he had to do on his own. The day of the regional competition arrived. The boy wore the same clean shirt he had worn for the city showcase, slightly too big but neatly pressed. His shoes were old but polished the night before. The teacher walked with him to the hall, guiding him through the long corridors filled with musicians and instruments. When he saw the grand piano on stage, his heart thumped loudly. It was bigger than any piano he had ever seen, and the keys shone like polished marble. Hundreds of people filled the seats waiting for the performance. For a moment, fear tried to creep in, but he remembered his practice, his hard work, and the applause from the city showcase. When his name was called, he walked onto the stage, his hands trembling slightly. He sat down at the piano, took a deep breath, and placed his fingers on the keys. He closed his eyes for a moment, imagining the music flowing through him. The first notes were soft and careful. He played each one with attention, feeling the music rather than just reading it. Slowly, his confidence grew. The audience fell silent, listening intently. The boy didn't notice them anymore. He only noticed the sound, the rhythm, the melody. As the piece progressed, he began to feel the music in his chest. His fingers moved faster and more naturally, carrying emotion and energy across the stage. He could see some of the judges leaning forward, listening closely. The notes he had imagined countless times at home now filled a real hall, and it felt more real than he had ever imagined. He played through the entire piece without mistakes. Every chord, every shift in rhythm, every soft and loud section came naturally. When he finished, he lifted his hands slowly from the keys. For a moment, the hall was silent. Then the applause erupted, loud, powerful, and long. The boy's cheeks flushed, and he bowed quickly. Backstage, the teacher hugged him tightly. "You were magnificent," she whispered. He smiled, still catching his breath. "I just played what I felt," he said softly. "That's why it was so beautiful," she said. "Technique is important, but you have heart. That's what people remember." The awards were announced later, and once again he won first place. This time it was a larger trophy, heavier and more impressive. He held it carefully, feeling proud but also humble. The applause and cheers followed him as he returned to his seat. After the competition, people came up to him. Some wanted advice, some asked him to teach them, and some simply wanted to shake his hand. He nodded politely, smiling shyly, and thanked each one. Inside, though, he felt something bigger than pride. He felt validation, that all the quiet nights, all the mistakes, all the practice had been worth it. When he returned home, he placed the trophy on his table, beside his chalk-drawn piano. His mother stood behind him, tears in her eyes. "I never thought I'd see this," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "It's only the beginning," he said. The next weeks at school were quieter than the competitions, but no less important. Students treated him with respect, and some even began asking for lessons. He shared what he could, though he never wanted to boast. The teacher continued guiding him, preparing him for bigger challenges, and helping him understand not just the notes, but the emotion behind every piece. One afternoon, as he practiced a particularly difficult piece, he noticed something. His hands moved automatically, almost without thinking, and the music came alive in a way it never had before. He realized that he had grown not just in skill but in understanding. He could feel the story in the notes, and the story felt like his own. The boy thought about his father, about the chalk-drawn piano, about the long nights of silent practice. He thought about the teacher who once doubted him, and about the applause of strangers. He understood now that every small step, every bit of patience had led him to this moment. That evening he sat quietly by his wooden table, tracing the notes on the sheet music with his fingers. The trophy gleamed softly in the lamplight. He knew he had achieved something, but he also knew there was so much more to learn. Music was endless, and he wanted to explore every corner of it. As he finally lay down to sleep, he felt a deep calm. The fear he once felt when forced to play had been replaced with determination, pride, and love for the music. He realized that the struggles, the doubts, and the quiet nights were all part of the journey. And for the first time, he was excited for what the future might bring. The boy had grown from being the quiet student in the back of the class to someone who could command attention without saying a word. But he remained humble, always remembering where he started, always remembering the silent practice, the wooden table, and the love of a father who had taught him not just the notes, but the feeling behind them. He didn't yet know how far his music would take him, but he knew one thing clearly: he would never stop playing, never stop learning, and never stop feeling. The music inside him had become his strength, his voice and his dream, and with that, the boy closed his eyes, letting the quiet hum of possibility fill the room, ready for the next chapter of his life. After the regional competition, the boy returned to school with a quiet sense of pride. The trophy he had won rested on the small table at home, but in his heart he felt a deeper victory. It wasn't just about winning. It was about how far he had come from the shy, quiet boy who once trembled in front of the piano in his music class. He had grown, not only in skill but in confidence, determination, and understanding of the music he loved. The months that followed were filled with practice, lessons, and small performances. The teacher continued to guide him, giving him pieces that challenged him in new ways. She encouraged him to enter more competitions, to explore different styles of music, and to play with both skill and emotion. Each challenge made him stronger, more confident, and more aware of his own talent. At school, he became an inspiration to his classmates. Students who had once ignored him now sought his advice, and some even asked to watch him practice. The boy never boasted or acted superior. He remained humble, always remembering the days when he had no piano, no guidance, and no audience. He understood that talent alone was not enough. Hard work, perseverance, and patience were just as important. One day, the teacher approached him with a letter. "It's an invitation," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "A music academy from the city wants to meet you. They've heard about your performances." The boy felt a mixture of fear and excitement. A real music academy was something he had only dreamed about. The thought of leaving his small school, his mother, and the familiar streets of his neighborhood was intimidating. But he also knew this could be an opportunity he could not ignore. That evening he sat at his wooden table and looked at the chalk-drawn keys. He remembered how he had learned to play there, how he had imagined the music in his mind, how he had turned silence into melody. He traced the keys one last time with his fingers and whispered, "I'll make you proud, Papa." His mother, noticing his quiet determination, came over and gently touched his shoulder. "You've worked so hard," she said softly. "I know whatever happens, you'll succeed." The boy nodded. "I have to try," he said simply. The next few days were filled with preparation. He practiced for hours on the real piano, repeating difficult sections, refining his technique, and learning new pieces. The teacher helped him every step of the way, correcting mistakes, offering advice, and reminding him to play with feeling. When the day of the academy meeting arrived, the boy walked into the large building with nervous anticipation. The academy's main hall was grand, with polished floors, high ceilings, and a shiny black grand piano on the stage. Students, teachers, and visitors filled the room. He had never seen anything like it. When his turn came, he stepped onto the stage and sat at the piano. He closed his eyes for a moment, imagining his father beside him, guiding his hands, showing him the notes, and encouraging him to believe in himself. Then he opened his eyes and began to play. The music poured out naturally, each note precise yet full of emotion. He played not just with skill but with understanding, telling a story with every chord, every melody, every pause. The audience listened in complete silence, captivated by the boy who had once struggled to play in front of his classmates. When he finished, there was a moment of stillness followed by a wave of applause that seemed to fill the entire hall. The judges exchanged looks, impressed by his talent, his technique, and the emotion he conveyed. The boy stood, bowing politely, his heart pounding, but his mind calm. He had given everything he had, and for the first time he truly felt proud of himself. After the performance, one of the academy directors approached him. "We've never seen a student with such natural ability and depth of feeling," he said. "We would like to offer you a full scholarship to study here. You have a rare gift, and we want to help you develop it fully." The boy's eyes widened in surprise. He could hardly believe it. A scholarship to study music at a prestigious academy. It was more than he had ever dreamed of. He turned to his mother, who was standing in the back, tears in her eyes. She nodded, smiling proudly. He accepted the offer, his voice steady but soft. "Thank you. I'll work hard," he said. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation and farewells. He said goodbye to his friends at school, promising to return and play for them whenever he could. The teacher hugged him tightly, pride and emotion in her eyes. "Remember," she whispered, "it's not just talent. It's your heart that makes you special. Keep that alive." He arrived at the academy, a place filled with talented students from all over the city. At first he felt out of place. The other students had new instruments, perfect uniforms, and polished techniques. He had his worn shoes, his old shirts, and the determination in his heart. But as soon as he sat at the grand piano for his first class, he felt at home. The keys under his fingers, the sound that filled the room, and the music that flowed from him reminded him of everything he had worked for. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The boy studied tirelessly, learning new techniques, practicing complex compositions, and performing in front of teachers and peers. He faced challenges, sometimes struggling with pieces that seemed impossible. But he remembered his journey, the chalk-drawn piano, the nights of silent practice, the teacher who had believed in him, and the applause that had once filled his heart with hope. Every time he stumbled, he reminded himself of those moments. Slowly but surely, he grew stronger, more confident, and more skilled. He realized that talent alone was not enough. It was patience, perseverance, and love for music that made a true musician. His performances at the academy began to draw attention. Teachers praised his technique, his understanding of music, and the emotion he brought to every piece. Fellow students began to admire him, not just for his skill but for his humility and dedication. He shared what he had learned with others, teaching younger students and encouraging them to practice with heart and patience. One day, during a practice session, a famous pianist visited the academy. He was there to give a lecture and hear students play. When he saw the boy play, his eyes widened. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked, astonished. The boy smiled softly. "I practiced a lot," he said simply. "And I love the piano." The pianist nodded, impressed. "Keep this love. It will take you far." The boy continued to grow, not just as a pianist, but as a person. He learned to trust himself, to be patient with his mistakes, and to find joy in every note he played. The music became his voice, a way to share his story without words. Years later, the boy, now a young man, returned to his old school to perform for the students who had once laughed at him. He played the same piece that had started it all, now perfected with years of practice and experience. The students watched in awe, realizing that the quiet boy from the back of the class had become a true master. The teacher who had once doubted him sat in the front row, tears in her eyes. She had watched him grow from a shy, unsure student into a musician who could touch hearts with every note. After the performance, she hugged him tightly. "I knew you had something special," she whispered. He smiled humbly. "Thank you for believing in me," he said softly. The young man continued to perform, traveling to different cities, sharing his music and inspiring others. But he never forgot where he came from: the wooden table, the chalk-drawn piano, his mother's quiet encouragement, and the teacher who had given him his first chance. He realized that true success was not about fame or money, but about following your passion, working hard and never giving up. The music inside him had carried him from the back of a classroom to stages he had only dreamed of. It had given him a voice, a purpose, and a way to touch the lives of others. And as he sat at the piano, performing for an audience that filled the hall, he felt the same joy he had felt the first time his fingers touched a real piano. The music was no longer just sound. It was life itself flowing through him, connecting him to everyone who listened. The journey had been long, full of challenges and doubt, but it had also been filled with hope, determination, and love. The boy who had once been forced to play a difficult piece, who had trembled in front of his classmates, had become a master, not just of the piano, but of his own life. And with each note he played, he remembered everything that had brought him here, knowing that the music would always guide him, inspire him, and remind him that dreams, no matter how impossible they seem, can come true with patience, love, and courage.